Anyone here see the screen pretty well? Should I make it bigger or smaller?
Pretty good.
Yeah, sorry for that. I can share the link right now. Okay, so hello. I'm probably not a familiar face to most of you, but I work with Alex in his lab. I'm a software engineer at the U here, also doing my master's. Alex asked me to put together this lab to explain how to do homework 4. There's some tricky parts on it for sure. We have 2 visualizations that have to be coordinated together, and they use a central store, and all of that can be like quite a bit to handle. So in this lab, I've mostly focused on trying to show you how to do the visualization components. Like the stuff to do the syncing will be a little bit for yourself, but shouldn't be too tricky to figure out. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to ask on Slack at any time, of course. And then if there's anything I can help with today, that would be great. So I'm basically just going to talk through some of this this code here. It's going to look a little bit different to how you're going to do it yourself, since it's on observable here, and there's some caveats that come with that. But when you do it yourself, it'll be the same familiar thing that you're used to. I'll point out where it's different if it needs to be different at any point. And yeah, hopefully that will help you. So yeah, let's get started. Any questions to start with, or all good? Has anyone opened up the homework and had a look at it by this point, or are you waiting for this lab? A little bit. You looked at it a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
And it's
Yeah,
tricky.
there's no rushing. There's 2 weeks on this homework, right? So you have plenty of time. Okay, so up top here on the screen, I was loading in some of the required libraries. So this is slightly different to how you have it on your homework. Yours is already done for you. So the thing that I did here on observable is that the D3 object needs all of the things from D3, D3 geo projection, and D3 geo. So that just combines them all into one little thing there. And then the topo.json library is something we'll need as well, just to transform the map data from the topo.json into the paths that we can actually draw. This here, this file attachment, this is already done for you on the homework too. This is just loading the countries file at this point. So the Alber is 10M, I think it's like 10-meter accuracy probably. And then the Albers is, counties Albers is the US counties. So the first thing that I did is I used topo.json and then feature. Feature is a way to extract a specific feature of the map. So there's multiple different objects and features inside of any one given map in the topo.json. And in this case, I'm extracting out the nation and the states. On your homework, I think you can probably, or you maybe need to figure out which one it is specifically. But you're basically looking for a world map. So there'll be something like world or countries or something like that. And then you'll, yeah, I think countries, yeah. The next thing to do is to set up a projection whenever you're going to make a map. So the projection that we're going to use here is Geo Albers USA. Pretty sure you're given one on the homework too, with Geo Winkle 3, which is the one that National Geographic uses. For this one, for Geo Albers, this gives you a kind of decent representation of the US. And it gives you can see like, you end up with Alaska and Hawaii and nice little spots down here, which is pretty useful if you're trying to look at the US. The other things I did here is I aliased geopath to just be path. So whenever you see me call the function path, remember that this is using the D3 geopath. And then I also made myself a graticule here, which is the grid lines. And then you end up with, that's calling geogradicule, which is like the inbuilt function, which just gives you like every 10 degrees, it will give you a line basically. Which I actually think I have commented out, so let's add that back real quick. That is not following the projection at all. Okay, we'll just word. This is how you would code it up. But
And excuse me,
code it up for now. Okay, so
the
the first thing to do whenever you're making
observable
any kind of
thing,
visualization is you're going to need your SVG, as I'm sure
the
you're aware.
observable
So the
will
first thing that I
persist
added
after the
here
run.
was an SVG. I gave it an ID of map. Then I added some groups for myself here. You could do this through D3 and JavaScript and just set them up, or add them straight to the HTML. In this case, I found it was easier just to add them here. So I added the gradicule, and then I had a group for nation and a group for states. I then selected that and I stored it as SVG, which is my variable. So whenever you see SVG, you can think this is going to be the map. The next thing I did was to add the gradicule. This isn't working right now because it's not doing the projection, but this is the rough idea. So let's just talk through the code quickly. So I'm selecting the gradicule group up here. I'm trying to add a path with the path from the gradicule. The problem is we need to add the projection in here. That's why I wasn't giving you the right representation. But on your homework, it should be a little easier, I think. And you can definitely find some resources out there for how to do the projection properly for the gradicule. Yeah, so on your homework, this geopath here, if you can pass the projection into the path function, it will work. But it's causing this weird issue here. But if I was to like draw the gradicule now, it would work. So let me uncomment this. And let me this one out. So at this point, this is how I did it when I was working on this solution for the homework here. So the map, if you pass the projection in, it's able to use that projection when it's using the gradicule. But yeah, for this example, it's not using it. Just it's a limitation of this GeoAlbers, I think. But when you use the Winkle 3, you can pass the projection in, and that will give you a nice interface to draw these and like the right shapes and things like that. So let me undo this again. So you can see in this map, I'm adding some color. We'll talk about how to do that in a second, but this is the kind of rough idea. Right now, it's just colored randomly. Of course, for your homework, you'll use the COVID cases that you're given in your data set. The way to add the countries and add the color, in this case, it's states, right? So I set up a color scale here. This is a sequential scale using interpolate reds. So that's a red scale from white to red. And there are 3 points. There's like a start, a midpoint, and an end, 3 different colors. So if you're ever trying to plot like a legend for it, you need 3 different points along in your SVG. Thing to keep in mind. So using this color scale, I just set a domain of 0 to 1, and I set it to 0 to 1 here as my domain, because I know that the math.random function that I'm calling down here, just to give it a random color, has a domain of 0 to 1. So you'll of course use your data for this. There's a bunch of D3 functions you can use, D3 max, D3 min. There's also one called D3 extent. That's really useful for getting like the low and the high. But obviously you need to get the data in the right format to put it into there first. So that's useful. Yeah, so if you were to change the domain here to the maximum and the minimum, so like if you had min to max, basically, is what you're just saying, right? Then whenever you pass in a value that's within the min and the max, it will give you a color in that scale. So yeah, in this case, our min and max is 0 and 1 for the random function. So whenever we pass any random value in, it's going to get something on that scale. And that leaves us with these random colors right here. Just that I'm using the random function in this one. Usually you would pass it in like for your row of your data, right? So I think on the homework, you're asked to get the max of each country, like the maximum number of, yeah, right. And the data is structured such that when you like, the data always grows. So like it's counting up over time. So it's basically just like the last day. Like whatever the value is of the last day will be the max for that country. And yeah, so let's talk through this a little bit. So I selected the nation. I added a path. I used that path function, which is just the alias of the D3 geopath. And I passed in the nation object. The nation object is that topo JSON that I've manipulated. Whenever you're using a path, it's good to set the filter to none, unless you're going to actually fill something like the states in this example. So for the nation, like the border around the outside, I don't want it to fill. I just want the line. And then I'm using a stroke of light gray. You can use anything. I think you can also like style it with CSS or do whatever you need to do. But in this case, light gray is perfectly fine. The next thing that I do is for adding each of the states. So I select the states. I select all paths. This is like a typical enter, like a D3 enter paradigm here. I said that the data is going to be states.features. What did I set it as? State.features. If we come up here to the states object, we'll see that this object has two different things inside of it. It has a type and it has features. Each of these features is an object. Each object has like a geometry. And using the D3 path function on this, like the object, the sub objects of the features will give you the actual outlines of the countries. So I use states.features. And then when we enter, we append a path. We're going to just call path. This is the function. By doing this, it knows to use the features that are coming from this data set to create the geometries. Then I fill it here. I use the color scale on a random value. In your case, you would use the actual values from the data set. And then I'm not sure how much you've gone over this so far in class, but this is a little anonymous function here that takes the data, like one piece of the data, so one of the states, and then is computing a different color scale, like a value for each one, the color value for each one. Yep, you'll just use the maximum value for the homework. That's right. So yeah, you can think that like your code will look very similar. Apart from this math.random, you'll be doing some like array filter to get just the maximum value from there. Then again, I give it a stroke, and then yeah, that's everything you need to build up this visualization here. Yep. So the question is where do you add the on click here essentially? So what I would do is I would actually make this a variable, say like const states equals this. You could add it directly at the bottom here. You could just say like on click. Let's go through it. We can say like console.log clicked. And then if we use the little anonymous function here, we can actually tell which one was clicked. So let me rerun this. Yeah, I see. So the question is which attribute of the map. So I think just the fill of the map, like basically each country. Like you should be able to click on that country, like on the color for that country, and it will like then change the map, change the line chart. So in this case, it would be, let's look. For example, like here, I'm going to click inside of California. And then in my terminal down here, it's telling me clicked. This was what was clicked. This was the target element. Hover and it shows you it was that one. So yeah, you're welcome to do it like this, or you can actually save it out to like a state D3, and then you can say like state or state D3. dot on click, something like that. Multiple on-click functions? That's possible, but the like a better way to handle that would be to inside of here. If you wanted to do multiple things, you can actually. So instead of just doing, for example, you have like D, and then you like call some function in here like this. If you instead give yourself like a function body, you can do multiple things. So you say like hello1, hello2, and that's gonna then do like the first thing and the second thing. So that's the better way to handle if you want to do multiple things basically in your function. And these don't have to be like external functions. You could actually just write them right here. Right? That would be fine. Yeah, otherwise you're gonna end up with multiple event handlers on the same thing, which could be a bit weird. Okay, are there any other questions on the map before I move on? Here or on Slack? I see there are 4 questions in the Slack. Oh, I cannot hear your question, sorry. Let me turn my speakers up. People in the room join Zoom, we can hear them. Hopefully you can hear the questions, or I'll try to repeat them when they're asked. Sorry about that. I don't know how I'm going to keep an eye on both of these, but yeah, we'll just put it there for now. Okay, if there are no other questions on the map, let's talk about how to make a gradient on a rectangle so that you can make like a legend, basically. In the homework, you have to just show like the minimum possible cases to the maximum cases as the legend, and then show how the reds change. This is where the 3 points along the way will help you. In this case, we coded up a gradient of multiple just random colors, and we ended up with 4 different stops. So there's 0, 30%, 60%, and 100% of the way through the bar here. The way it works is kind of strange and interesting. So in order to define the gradient on your SVG element, there has to be something called defs, which is definitions. Inside this definitions, you can add anything that you're going to reuse multiple times. You could add icons here, but we're going to use it for a linear gradient. The important thing to make sure you have is an ID on this that's unique. So this one's called color-gradient. And then inside the linear gradient, you can add stops. This is actually also just on MDN linear gradients. There's some more information here. If you have questions, there's also like radial gradients and things like that. So for linear gradients, you need to specify at least 2 stops, like the start and the end, and what color is going to be, and then it will make kind of a gradient between them. You are going to want a stop color and a stop opacity. Opacity is basically always going to be 1. And then the color is going to be something that you're going to set probably dynamically from your scale, but you could also hard code it in like we've done here. If you were going to set it dynamically, you would do it through JavaScript. You'd set the style attribute, and then in here, you would do some kind of string interpolation to say like, this is the value from the scale. We're going to put it right in, right here. But yeah, for now, and just for example, this works pretty well. So yeah, once you have your defs and your linear gradient, you can then apply it to something else. So just having this in your code by itself will do nothing. It's just a definition that exists somewhere, and it's not super useful by itself. It becomes powerful when you actually have a rectangle that you're going to apply it to, or some other element. In our case here, it's a rectangle. So what I did is this SVG here is called legend. So we selected legend, we appended a rectangle, we set the width to be inner width, which is the width of the thing here in observable. You're going to set that dynamically. The Y here is 0, that just puts it the top left and the top left here. So height is 50, that's the height of the rectangle there. And then the fill here is the interesting part. We use URL and then hash color gradient. The hash color gradient is the CSS selector for this linear gradient right here. So hash means ID, and color gradient is the ID that we set right here.
So for this event, you can change the
the question is, can we change the HTML code? And yes, you can. You're not actually going to be given this linear gradient definition or the, yeah, I guess you could add, yeah, like the defs part. Yeah. You can add the defs to the SVG in the HTML. Although you might find that tricky because you're going to need to put the attributes on for the color, which you're going to do in JavaScript. So if you're hard coding in HTML, it might be kind of tricky to handle. It might just be easier to append a linear gradient and then append stops inside of it.
But when changing the colors, it should be done by
Changing the colors of what?
yeah, it also it should go from light to
Yeah. So the question is, if you're changing the colors on like the legend for the homework, should that be set through D3? And the answer is yes. You should be using the D3 scale that you have, and then you can D3 select. You would select, in this case, like the legend SVG. You would append defs, and then you would append a linear gradient, then you would append a stop, and then you would set the style attribute. And then this color here is the part that you would set with the D3 scale. Yeah. Okay. I'm sure you guys will have more questions about this when you're doing it, but for now it's fully okay. 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 Oh yeah.
A question. Before moving from the map, there was something like in the homework. There is some like a projection at the background. There are some lines. Can you please also guide us how we can make those lines?
Yes, so those lines are called the graticule. I have it commented out here. I just switched this map out to the US map right before this, so it's not quite working right now, but let me show you. So if I hide the countries, sorry, the states in this case, and I enable the graticule, I have to go up here and modify the path here. Let's pass the projection into the map. Into the path. If I run this and I redo these guys, you'll see this is the graticule just for like the zoomed in part of the US.
Awesome, thank you.
So yeah, the idea would be you use this graticule function, which comes from D3 geograticule. And then that by default gives you 10-degree spacing. And then you can apply like a stroke with an opacity. And then if you do that first, it will be the background for your map.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so I'm going to talk about data grouping now. This is important for the homework. So you're going to want to group all the data by the country, and then you will iterate over those countries, and then you'll have the rows just for that country each time that you're accessing the object when you're drawing the lines, basically. So here I just pulled some data from online. It's from eMarketer. It has 3 different properties. It has a year, it has media type, and it has spending. So in this case, I'm going to use the year as my x-axis. I'm going to use my spending as my y-axis, and then I'll have media be the grouping that we're doing. So you'll have multiple lines, one for each type of media. So to group the data, we use d3.group, and then we have to specify what key we want to use. So in this case, I'm using the d.media. This is that function, shorthand again. And this means like each time we get a row, let's look at the media for the value to see which group we're going to assign that to. And then when we do this operation, we end up with a map, a JavaScript map that goes from the type of media to the rows for that media. So for example, here we have digital. Digital has 7 rows. Each row has a year, the media and the spending, like we had before. But you'll notice that this is just the ones for digital. And then if I open TV, it's just the ones for TV. This is super useful for us building our line. So here's the final product of what we're about to make. We have a line chart here, and you can move the mouse and the line moves. It's not quite following the mouse right now. There's some bug in here, but this is like the rough idea of how to get it to work. One thing to note, and that you'll have to do on your homework, is that, am I going to be able to show this? No. Okay, well, maybe I'll reload in a second here and we can look at it. What I was going to say is that the order of the labels has to be in the order of the lines. So you'll notice that digital is on top here, then TV. And then as I move the mouse, it should reorder as the lines kind of like go above and below each other. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So here is the SVG that I have. Let's realign that. So I have an SVG here called line chart SVG. It has axis group, it has lines, and it has overlay. And then in the overlay, we have a line. That's the vertical line. It's moving here. First thing to do is obviously select it. Here I made a padding object. The syntax is a little weird because of observable, but essentially I have padding left, bottom, and right. And this shows us the padding on the left side, the bottom side, and the right side of the visualization here. It's useful to define these in one place because you're going to be using them over and over again. And then if you want to ever change it, it's a huge pain if you need to go in and change every time you said 15 pixels or something. If you can just change it in once, it's much easier. The next thing I did is I made a color scale. So this is a scale ordinal. Ordinal, we just have like categorical data, right? So we can use ordinal. The scheme 10 tableau, or scheme tableau 10, is a decent color scheme. You can see these at D3 scale chromatic. Not sure if you guys have been to this page in class, but this has like all the categorical color schemes you might use. Also has continuous ones too. So these are converging, diverging, and yeah, regular percentage type scales. The next thing I do is I make two objects and like one for each axis, and then I've written code that will make the axes, will like draw the axes with the ticks, and it will add a text to it all in one step. So this first part here, I made a scale linear for the x-axis. The domain is 2016 to 2022, which is the range of that data that I'm pulling in. The range of the scale is from padding left to inner width minus padding right. So little gap for the axis, little gap on the right side, so which one, everything in the middle there. That's how to define that. The next thing to do is to actually call the axes to get them to display. So here we have, select the x-axis. We're going to do a transform, which is going to just move it down to the bottom. So we're going to move it 0 in the x direction, and we're going to move it 600 minus the padding bottom. So if you remember, the y goes top down. So it's 600 down and then a little bit up as we subtract out the padding bottom there. And then we're going to use d3.axis bottom. We're going to call that, and then we're going to specify the ticks that we want inside of here. So in this case, we wanted 7 ticks, and we wanted them with this formatting, and that gives us like the years here. So there's 7 ticks, and the format is right. There's no extra stuff before or after. Whatnot. Why do we use ticks? So sometimes without it, you can end up with ugly scales. So with you specifically, you're going to have dates. Oh, sorry. And the question is, why do we use ticks? If you guys didn't hear. So with dates specifically, it's a really messy format. If you just were to display them normally, it would use like the default toString method on a date, and that gives you like everything. It gives you year, month, day, yeah, hours, minutes, seconds. So it's just like a really long string. What we want to do here is you can use ticks, or there's D3 format as well. I don't have an example for that but you can pass in, I think you can say like dot format here, and then you can use d3.format, and that's a bit more general, and it gives you like access to a few more like options you can tune to make it look nice. But yeah, in your case for the homework, you have to just put like month and then year, and there's like, it's not quite like 0.2D like this, but there are specific like format strings available for you to sit, like get just the 3-letter month and the year. And that's like a pretty good idea. The next thing to do is to add the axis text here, the label. So to do this, we just select the axes, append a text, put the text to be what we want, and then move it to where we want with X and Y. In this case, it's in a pretty decent spot here, but you know, you can play with exactly where it shows up and make it look nice. It's easier to do this when you have your own SVG and it's got a fixed size. This one changes as you scale the screen back and forth. So. Okay, then the next thing we do for the y-axis here is we're making a scale linear. Our domain is the range of our data. So we could use D3 extent here, but I just hard coded this in. So it's from 0 to the max of the spending. You could also use D3 max here. And that would look like something like this. So you would then have your data passed in, and then for each row you get its spending. The range for this one is going to be 600 minus the padding bottom. So this is distance in y again. So we're going to go 600 all the way to the bottom and then subtract out the padding bottom to get our minimum value. And then we're going to say 10 is our top value. That's just so it doesn't bump into like the top of the scale here. And then defining it this way, where you have the lowest y value first and then the highest y value second. That means you don't then have to mess around with like trying to flip your scale once you've made it, which can be a pain. If you're trying to do like bar charts and stuff, especially, it can be real tricky. And then if we use nice here, that just cleans up the labels. Again, this is all similar. So we're gonna select the axes, we're gonna add a group, we're gonna transform it, and then call the axis. The transform here is actually going to move it across to the right in the X direction by a padding left amount. So it's going to move it just like a little bit in to the side, because if you were to call it at 0, it would draw the ticks outside of the plot, the SVG. And then we don't move it at all in the Y direction. And hopefully you can see that gives us the space to have our labels, our ticks in our label right there. And then the last thing we do is we just append the text. This one's a little more tricky because you need to rotate it. So if you rotate by -90, that gives you the one that I have here. And then the X and Y is a little tricky. You rotate it and then you move it -X. So that's like down the page in this point. So what was the question? Okay, so the question is, why do we rotate? So if I was to remove the rotate here, the spending would be like regular text. It would be drawn, you know, like this. So we would need way more padding and we'd lose visualization space. So yeah, rotating it just keeps it compact on the side there. Okay, any questions on the axes drawing, or you guys got that down?
Why is the X value negative?
Yeah, so with the rotate we're doing, it's -90, so that is counterclockwise 90 degrees. So if you think about it, if you rotate something counterclockwise 90 degrees and then it's like down, right? It's to the left of where it is there, so that's negative. You're moving it to the left. You can also think of it in the other way, right? If you move it to the left first and then rotate it around, it will swing down to be below where it's at. Does that make sense? Or maybe I can visualize it a different way for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Why do I have return? This is just an observable weirdness. Yeah. So because I want to call multiple things here and observable, I'm doing like 3 things at once. It has to be in a function, so I have to return something if I want to assign it, which is what I'm doing. Okay, with that, we can talk about plotting. So this is how to actually draw the lines. Before we go, I'm gonna make this plotting. Okay, so what we're doing in this stage is we're trying to add paths, basically. Paths have the D attribute, which gives you the actual the path of the line with the N and the L and whatnot. So in this case, what we're doing is we're using that grouped data that we had from before. So this is the map. The same, that's not the problem. So this is our group data. So we know that for each element basically in that map, we're going to get the name of the media, in this case, the marketing media that's been used, and then each of the rows as the values. So you can see that that's represented here. So when I'm accessing each individual element, like each thing that we're iterating through, I'm going to have a group name and values. The values are the rows. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm setting the fill to be none. For a path, fill none just means just give me the outline of what we're trying to draw. The stroke here is going to be set by the type of the media. So this could be set just from, this is what we're grouping by, right? So we could actually just say group here. This is the actual thing that we're going to be using to color the line. So in this case, it would be like digital or TV, and that is the group name in this case. You have to set a stroke width. It's just good practice. So I set it to 1 here. And then for the actual the line that we're going to draw, we will take the group and the values again. We'll use D3 line, and then we'll specify how to draw the X and the Y at each stage. So the X is going to be from the year, but we're also going to call X-axis here. So we want to know how far along the X-axis we want to be. And then for the Y, we're going to use the spending. Again, we're going to use the Y-axis. And then if we were to leave this out here, this values, it would just be a D3 line definition. So we actually have to call the line on those values. And by doing that, we get our nice output here. I don't think there's anything too crazy going on there, apart from this unpacking of the map. Basically, that's like the hardest part, just to know that. Are there any questions on the syntax at all? Or? Yeah, I'm sure as you play with it, you'll come up with some more questions. But here, so you might be asking, why is this function here? How is this able to access the year for just one of the rows? When we're looking at the map objects, right, in each iteration, like each time we're going to draw a new path, we're looking at the whole group to rows. So we have the whole thing. When we just pass values into the line, what happens is we then just get access to just the rows. And then each of these functions here is acting just on one row at a time. So we're kind of taking all of the rows, we're passing them through to the line, and then it's able to access each one individually. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the interaction here. This one's a little bit more complicated than what we've seen so far. It's similar to the on-click, but we're going to use on mouse move. That means that when the mouse moves over the SVG or whatever we've attached the listener to, it will send us an event, which we're going to catch here. And that event is just going to tell us like the mouse position, what it was over specifically. I think it also tells you like some keyboard stuff, but you don't need for this specifically. So with this mouse move event, what we're going to do on the line chart is we only want to move the line when we're over the actual plotting area, not over the axes. So we're going to say we want the event client X to be more than the padding left, and the client X to be less than the inner width minus the padding right. So we want it to be within the plotting area, essentially. If that's true, we're going to set the line position. Lines have 4 required attributes that you need to set, and it's basically just 2 coordinates. So you have x1 and x2 for like the starting and the ending x value, and then y1 and y2 for the starting and ending y value. In this case, we just want to draw a straight line vertically. So the y value is going to be changing and the x value is going to be fixed. So we want it to be the same x value at the top and the bottom. So in this case, we just use the client x from the event. And then the y value is from the top, which is 0, to the bottom, which is 600 minus padding bottom. gets it above the axis there. So that logic just there, where we select the line and we set the position of it, will give us everything, well, will allow us to move the line back and forth, but we'll have none of this text that we have displayed on the right side here. To do that, we're going to add some SVG text elements. And if we do it in the same function, we're going to have the same event that we're capturing. So that's the best practice for it. We're going to find what year was hovered. So the year hovered is like that position on the x-axis, and we can use x-axis invert for that. So we pass it a position, and it tells us what the input was for that position. So it tells us what year we put in. This makes it nice and easy, because then we can just, in this case, we want to use the floor of it. That will give us specifically just the year that we were at, because we have a scale linear here. If we don't use the floor, we're going to get some fractional value. So where the mouse is at right here, where the line is at, it thinks that that would be 2018.5, whereas we just want 2018. So we can select our data. So in this case, we can use the floor on the homework. I'm not certain that you need to use it, but keep in mind, you might need to just transform it a little just to make it look like the data. We can then filter the marketing data where the year is equal to the year hovered. And then this here, this sort is gonna, okay, so let's go step by step. We start with the entire marketing data. We're gonna filter to where the year is the year that we've hovered. The year that we've hovered will have a spending amount for TV, for digital. So for each of our groups will be represented exactly once in this data set. What we need to do is for our text, and so that the text shows up in the right order as we move across and like as the lines overlap each other, we need to look at that date, which is the largest amount. And the way that we can do that is just through this sort here. So we're comparing row A to row B all the way through the table. And if we just say row B dot spending minus row A dot spending, that will sort the rows into the right order, where the first element in the array is the top one and the last element in the array will be the bottom one. And this is by the spending. So you can see that in this case, as I'm hovering, the top is digital, and then the bottom would be directories in this case. The last thing to do is to append that text. So now that we have filtered down the data to this filtered data object, we can select the overlay, select all text, and then use D3 join, which is the interactive merge stuff, to add more text elements. The text that we're going to show inside of each text element, in this case, is the media type and the spending specifically for that. So what that looks like is this. You'll notice here that it's fractional, or it's decimal. So maybe this isn't the best idea here. Maybe that's too precise and we don't need that level of detail. This is another place where we can use d3.format. It's not quite what I want. It's giving me 2 decimals. I need to learn this a little more. Okay, well, the idea is that we can use D3 format here to give us a different format. In this case, it's just added a greater than, or did I add that? Yeah, no. So in this case, it has added that greater than symbol with the D3 format function. You would use D3 format to do something more useful. You would truncate some of it off. So one of the things you can do is display it using 2 significant figures in standard units. So it would say 220K instead of 221,500, whatever, you know. And that will simplify it down a little bit. And we're not then being over precise, and it kind of takes away a little bit of the bias, right? Of maybe people will think our data is absolutely precise where there's some error in it. So we're going to say generally there's about 220,000, and we can do that with our formatting of the labels. So here I'm going to remove that just for easiness. Now, the next things to do for each text element is we set an X value. In this case, we're just doing client X, but on the homework, you're asked to make it flip around. So if we're too close to the right side of the plot, we want it to flip to the other side of the line so that we can still read it even as the line approaches the right side of the plot. And the way you do that is you add some logic in here. You can use what's called a ternary operator. So you would have like some condition. And you'd say, if the condition is met, then display it on the right side. Otherwise, you would do like event.click X. And then you would subtract off something to flip it to the other side. That's gonna be a little tricky with like the length of the strings and making sure that they don't then overflow the line and overflow the plot. But this is the rough idea. This is called a ternary operator, the question mark. And that lets you do inline, like an if statement, and then give two different values from it. Yeah, so I can show you here. The question is, when do we need to flip it? So I'm not going to be able to show you here. So as the text is approaching the right side of the screen here, if there was not a bug, the line would be right on the mouse and you wouldn't be able to read the text at this point. So by that point, you would have needed to have flipped it so that you could keep reading the text. So the idea is as the line moves further and further right, just move the text to the left side of it so that it's still visible. Okay, so you set an X position so that we can still see the text, and the Y position, we're just going to use the index. So this function where we had the syntax and we had the we're using D before just to get the row values. There's a second thing that's also available to you here, I for index. In this case, you can just use that index to move it down by however far it is. The other thing to do is to fill it to set the color. So in this case, we can use that same color scale. We can use the row and we can use the media from that row here. And then we end up again with the text color matched to the line that it represents. Okay, that's about all I have to show you today. Are there any questions on anything I've shown? Any part of it?
Yeah. Read how to
Yeah. So the question is basically, how do we do how do we move the labels for the line here as the lines on the chart are in a different position? And do you need to use D3 format to do that? The answer is no. So we have a little bit. Let me see where I can find it. So no, you don't need to do that because it's already done for you in this step. So when we do the sorting here, so what we do is we filter it down to just like all marketing just for that 1 year. And then we sort them here so that the labels are in the right order. So then when you go to, you do the data and you join them on, they get added in that same order that we sorted them to. So the first one will be digital, the second one will be TV. And then because this is happening every time we move the mouse, even 1 pixel, as we move the mouse, it will recompute the order that it needs to be in. So as you move it, it will update the SVG text to be in the right spot. And then the D3 format would be just for, like, if you wanted to cut off these decimals here, if you wanted it to be 125, or you wanted it to be 69, that's how we would use D3 format, just to shorten the labels there.
How does that sort work? Is that, you're mentioning 2 rows? Is it iterating over all combinations of 2 rows and bubble sorting effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not certain exactly what the algorithm is using to do it is, but this is a function that's on the array prototype. So if we go MDN array sort.
Okay.
All arrays in JavaScript will have this. It has a default sort method. Like if it's numbers, it will try and do what it's doing here, but you can also specify the custom function for the sort as well. And the custom function takes 2 rows, A and B, and then does something to compare them.
Interesting.
So the question is, do you need to move the values or can you just use the levels to sort? So when you do the sorting here, you want to sort by like on the homework, you want to sort by the number of cases. Yeah, so in this case, we're using spending and then that spending, because that's where it's displayed on the chart, right? Like the higher spending will be at the top of the chart. So that's what we want to sort by.
And sorry, but it's activities connected to the page. Like
Mm.
next, if the TVs that will go up.
So the question is, how is it displaying in this order and how is it moving basically in the Y direction to show as it is here? So that's just in this little bit right at the bottom. So once we've sorted it, when we join that data on, it's going to get joined in the order that it's in this filtered data object here. And then what we do is we set the Y value, and then we use the index of where it is to then move it down. And we get that through this function right here. So this here is just like, there'll be 0, then 1, then 2. And then what we're doing is we're just moving it down 20 pixels times whatever index it is.
There is also one of the very important which is in the fact we select a certain list.
Mhm.
And according to that, we do the selection for one certain.
Right, so that's a little more complicated. So the question is, how do we get the interaction to work across components? So the way that we've given you that is that we've given you a central store. Inside of the store, each component is represented as a property. So you'll have like a map component and you'll have the lines component. So what will happen is on clicking the map, you will go to the global state and then you'll go to the lines component and you'll say update your selection. So what you do, there's a couple of things. So in the store, we're tracking what is selected. So you'll add it to the selected stuff, to the selected thing in the store. And then what you'll do after you've added it, you'll tell the other components update through the central store. So you have like the global state. And you'll do something like selected dot push. And then you'll have like country, right, that you've just selected. And then you'll say global state. And then you'll say you clicked in the map component, you're trying to tell the line chart to update. You'll say line chart dot update. And that will tell the component to then update.
That update is repeated. I don't have to write the code this much.
You do have to code. So the question is this built in? No, this is something that you have to write.
I think it is for me.
I'm not certain about homework 3. But possibly. I see. Yeah, it sounds similar to homework 3 in the update. But I think it's a little bit different because what we're doing is we have each visualization is a class. And then what we're doing is we're calling a method on that class. I see. Yeah, so it sounds similar to your last one, is what I'll say, but it's a little different in that, yeah. In your on click, you'll then push to like the selected countries and you'll tell it to update. And then in the other component, what you'll do is you'll be listening for, or you'll have your method for that. And what it will do is check what was selected in the store, and then it will update itself to just display what was selected in the store. Okay.
That space lines from the left to right. And I was wondering if this would be like
yeah. Yeah. So the question is, do transitions interfere with like the event stuff? They shouldn't, is my understanding. But you might have to do it in a very specific way where you append whatever you're appending to the selection with the transition, and then you like kind of save that, and then you do in a separate step, you do your on click or something like that. So yeah, sometimes it can be a little finicky, but in theory, that's possible that you can have a transition, it transition into the chart, and then you can have an on click or something like that.
That two words, the transition and then transfer. What is it doing?
Yeah, so transition is an animation. So a D3 transition, you can, if you have like a bar chart and you're going to show them all, you can display them all at the same place and then they kind of fan out. Or maybe you have lines where they kind of like move or do something. That's a transition. And then there is the attribute transform, which goes onto an element. And then inside the transform, you can do a rotate, you can do a scale, so you can change it, you can translate it, you can move it around. But that's not something that generally you would do dynamically. I guess that kind of is what D3 does under the hood to move it around, but you would maybe just set a value for it. So for example, when we display our axes, we want them to move them in so that we have enough space to show the ticks. That's something that you kind of set statically in general when you're coding. Cool. Any questions from Zoom? Okay,
Good.
so you're very welcome, Sarah. Okay, have a good day, everyone. Of
Hey, thanks so much.
course.
Manana.
See ya.